The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the trading post in Weaverville, California, and Helena Warren pressed herself against the worn leather seat as the driver's voice erupted in a string of curses at the horses. Her whole body went rigid, shoulders hunching forward, hands trembling in her lap as the shouting continued. It was 1878, and she had traveled nearly 300 miles from Sacramento to escape memories that still lived in every raised voice and sudden movement. She waited until the silence stretched long enough to feel safe before stepping down from the coach, her legs unsteady after 2 days of rattling over mountain roads. The September air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, cooler here in the northern mountains than the valley she'd left behind. Weaverville sprawled before her, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a dirt main street, with dense forest crowding close on all sides. Gold miners still worked claims in the surrounding hills, though the rush had peaked decades earlier. Helena smoothed her travel-stained skirts and retrieved her 2 small cases from the boot of the coach. Everything she owned fit into those bags. At 22 years old, she was starting over in a town where nobody knew her name or her history, and that was exactly what she needed. Miss Warren. A thin man in spectacles approached, consulting a piece of paper. "I'm Theodore Cunningham. Mrs. Patterson wrote that you'd be arriving today." Helena nodded, relieved that her new employer had sent someone to meet her. She'd answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher 2 months ago, desperate for any position that would take her far from Sacramento and the house where her father's rages had ruled every hour of every day until pneumonia finally claimed him last spring. "The schoolhouse is just down the street," Mr. Cunningham continued, gesturing vaguely. "We've prepared quarters for you in the back. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and private." "Thank you," Helena said quietly. She'd learned long ago that speaking softly often prevented the escalations that followed anything that might be perceived as argumentative. Mr. Cunningham reached for her bags, but a commotion near the trading post made him pause. 2 men had emerged, their voices rising in anger over some disputed transaction. Helena flinched hard, dropping one of her cases as her heart hammered against her ribs. The rational part of her mind knew these men weren't shouting at her, that she wasn't in danger, but her body didn't understand the difference. "Thieves, the lot of you," one man bellowed, his face red with rage. Helena's vision narrowed. She couldn't seem to draw a full breath. "Easy now." The voice came from somewhere to her left, low and calm as a summer stream. "Those fellows are just working out their business. They will not bother you." She turned her head slowly. The man standing a few feet away was unlike anyone she'd ever seen in Sacramento's parlors and tree-lined streets. He stood well over 6 feet tall, built like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding them. Broad shoulders strained against a worn buckskin shirt, and his arms showed the kind of muscle that came from years of hard labor. Dark hair fell past his collar, sun-streaked and tied back with a leather cord. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and remarkably gentle as he regarded her obvious distress. He made no move toward her, keeping his distance as though he understood that proximity might frighten her further. "My name is Dalton Brennan," he said in that same quiet voice. "I live up in the mountains, but I come down for supplies now and again. You look like you have just arrived." Helena managed a small nod, still struggling to calm her breathing. The shouting near the trading post had subsided, but her pulse continued to race. "Miss Warren is our new schoolteacher," Mr. Cunningham interjected, having missed or dismissed her moment of panic. "Just arrived from Sacramento." Dalton's gaze never left Helena's face. "Welcome to Weaverville, Miss Warren. It is a good town, though a bit rough around the edges. You will be safe here." Something in the certainty of his words, spoken without aggression or demand, began to unknot the tight coil of fear in her chest. She drew a deeper breath and managed to meet his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Just Dalton, if it suits you." He bent and retrieved her dropped case, handling it with care. "May I carry this to the schoolhouse for you? Mr. Cunningham looks like he has his hands full with the other one." The older man did indeed appear to be struggling with Helena's larger bag. She hesitated, but something in Dalton's patient stillness made her trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. "Yes, please. That's very kind." They made their way down the dusty street, Mr. Cunningham huffing slightly as he led the way. Dalton walked beside Helena, his long strides shortened to match her pace. He didn't crowd her space or attempt to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation. The simple courtesy of it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The schoolhouse was a simple frame building with large windows to let in light. Behind it, a smaller structure served as the teacher's residence. It consisted of one room with a bed, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow wardrobe. A rag rug covered part of the plank floor, and gingham curtains framed the single window. To Helena, who had grown up in a house filled with expensive furniture and simmering violence, it looked like paradise. "It's perfect," she said softly. Mr. Cunningham set down her bag with visible relief. "Classes start Monday. You'll have about 15 students ages 6 to 14. Some of the children come from mining families up in the hills, so attendance can be irregular. Mrs. Patterson will call on you tomorrow to discuss the particulars." After he left, Helena found herself alone with Dalton, who still held her smaller case. He set it gently on the floor near the wardrobe, then stepped back toward the door, clearly intending to give her privacy. "Thank you again," Helena said. "I apologize for my reaction earlier. I'm not usually so fragile." Dalton paused in the doorway, and when he spoke, his voice was even softer than before. "You are not fragile, Miss Warren. You are cautious. There is a difference and no need for apology." He left before she could respond, disappearing down the path toward the main street. Helena stood in her new home, one hand pressed to her chest, and felt the first small flutter of something that might, eventually, become hope. The days before school started passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Patterson, a formidable woman in her 50s who ran the general store with her husband, proved to be a wealth of information about the town and its families. She helped Helena inventory the schoolhouse supplies, which consisted of a few battered primers, several slates, and a collection of chalk that had seen better days. "We do the best we can," Mrs. Patterson said. "Most families can't afford to send books with their children. You'll need to be creative." Helena found that she didn't mind. The challenge of teaching with limited resources was far preferable to the life she'd left behind. In Sacramento, she'd been expected to make a good marriage, to simper and smile while men decided her future. Her father had arranged 3 different courtships before his death, each with men who reminded her far too much of him: loud, controlling, quick to anger. She'd broken off each engagement, enduring her father's fury for her disobedience. The last suitor had been the worst, a banker named Gerald who'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise when she tried to walk away from one of his tirades. She'd known then that she had to leave, had to find a life where she could be more than someone's property. On Saturday, 3 days after her arrival, Helena ventured into town to purchase a few necessities. The general store was busy with miners and their families stocking up for the week ahead. She moved quietly along the shelves, selecting a package of tea and some writing paper, doing her best to avoid the clusters of men whose voices bounced off the walls. She was reaching for a tin of crackers when a man's hand shot past her to grab it first. "Pardon me, miss, but I was here before you." The words weren't particularly aggressive, but the sudden movement and proximity made Helena jerk backward, her shoulder blades hitting the shelf behind her. The tin fell from the man's hand, clattering to the floor. "Watch what you are doing." Another customer barked from the next aisle over, responding to the noise. Helena's breath came in short gasps. The walls seemed to press inward. "I think perhaps you should step back, friend." That low, calm voice again. Dalton materialized between Helena and the other customer, his broad frame creating a barrier without any threatening gestures. "The lady was clearly here first. You can wait your turn." The customer sputtered but backed away, perhaps recognizing that arguing with a man of Dalton's size would be unwise. Dalton waited until he'd gone, then turned to Helena with concern evident in his blue eyes. "Are you all right, Miss Warren?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking. Dalton glanced around the crowded store, then spoke quietly. "It is quite loud in here today. Would you like to wait outside while I gather your things? You can tell me what you need." The offer was so unexpected, so thoughtful, that Helena felt her eyes burn with unshed tears. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You did not ask, I offered." He smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face, making him look younger and somehow even kinder. "Please. It would ease my mind to know you are comfortable." Helena found herself nodding. She gave him her short list and the money to cover it, then escaped into the fresh air and sunshine. Her heart rate slowly returned to normal as she stood on the wooden sidewalk, watching wagons roll past and listening to the distant ring of a hammer on anvil from the blacksmith shop. Dalton emerged 10 minutes later with her purchases wrapped in brown paper. He'd added a small bag of peppermint candies to the bundle. "Mrs. Patterson said you might want these for your students. She put them on my account." "I can't let you pay for. Consider it a welcome gift to Weaverville's new teacher," Dalton said gently. "The children will be excited to have someone so dedicated to their learning." They walked together back toward the schoolhouse. Helena worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Why are you so kind to me? You don't even know me." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held a note of old pain. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 5 years. She married a man who seemed respectable enough, but he had a temper that he took out on her when no one was looking. I did not realize until it was too late. She died when I was 25. The doctor said it was a fall, but I knew better." Helena stopped walking, her heart aching for the sorrow in his words. "I'm so sorry. Her name was Margaret. She used to flinch just like you do when voices are raised." Dalton met her eyes, and she saw no pity there, only understanding. "I learned too late that some people need gentleness more than others, and that there is no shame in that. So when I see someone who carries the same caution, I try to do better than I did for my sister." They stood in the middle of the dusty street, and Helena felt something shift inside her chest. Here was a man who understood, who didn't dismiss her fear as foolishness or weakness, who spoke softly not because he was weak himself, but because he was strong enough to be gentle. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding." Dalton nodded. "If you ever need anything, Miss Warren, my cabin is about 5 miles north of town, up near the old Monarch mine. Anyone can point you in the right direction. I am often around if you need someone." He left her at the schoolhouse, tipping his head in a polite farewell. Helena watched him go. This mountain man with his long hair and buckskin clothes and his impossibly gentle soul, and thought that perhaps Weaverville might offer more than just escape. It might offer healing. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn sunshine. Helena's 15 students ranged from 6-year-old twins who could barely write their names to a 14-year-old boy who was already helping run his family's mining claim and only attended school sporadically. She quickly learned that the children were eager to learn but easily distracted, their lives too full of adult responsibilities to give school their full attention. By the end of the first week, Helena had established a rhythm. She taught reading and arithmetic in the mornings, history and geography in the afternoons. The peppermint candies Dalton had provided became rewards for good behavior and completed work. The children adored her soft-spoken manner, so different from the harsh discipline they'd known from the previous teacher, an elderly man who'd believed in the liberal use of a hickory switch. Helena never raised her voice, never made sudden movements. She led with patience and encouragement, and the children bloomed under her care. On Friday afternoon, just as she was dismissing her students, Dalton appeared at the schoolhouse door with a load of firewood stacked in his arms. "Thought you might need this before the weather turns," he said quietly. "Winters can be harsh in the mountains." The children scattered around him like minnows around a boulder, shouting greetings. Dalton's face softened as he greeted each child by name, asking after their families and their studies. He clearly knew them all, had probably watched some of them grow up during his visits to town. "Mr. Dalton, did you really fight a bear?" one boy asked with wide eyes. "No, Charlie. I shared my campsite with a bear once, but there was no fighting involved. She was far more interested in my stores of dried fish than in me." The children laughed, and Helena watched the easy way Dalton moved among them, never raising his voice even when they clamored for his attention. When they finally dispersed toward their various homes, he carried the firewood around to her quarters and stacked it neatly beside the stove. "You didn't have to do this," Helena said, though she was deeply grateful. She'd been worrying about firewood but hadn't known who to ask for help obtaining it. "I wanted to." Dalton brushed bark and dust from his hands. "How was your first week of teaching?" "Wonderful. Challenging, but wonderful." Helena found herself smiling. "The children are bright and curious. I think we will do well together. I have no doubt." Dalton moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Warren, I hope this is not too forward, but there is a barn dance next Saturday in town. It is not a fancy affair, but it is a chance for the community to gather. I would be honored if you would allow me to escort you." Helena's first instinct was to refuse. Dances meant crowds and noise and too many opportunities for things to go wrong. But when she looked at Dalton, at his patient expression and the careful way he held himself, not presuming her answer, she found herself wanting to say yes, wanting to try. "I would like that," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." His smile was like sunrise over the mountains. "I will call for you at 6 o'clock, if that suits you." After he left, Helena sat at her small table and pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. She couldn't remember the last time she'd looked forward to something social, the last time a man's attention had felt like a gift rather than a threat. Dalton made her feel safe in a way she'd never experienced, and the novelty of it was both thrilling and terrifying. The week leading up to the dance crawled by. Helena threw herself into her teaching, developing lessons that would keep her students engaged and learning. She wrote letters to the school board in Sacramento, requesting book donations for her classroom. She mended the gingham curtains and swept her quarters until every surface gleamed, and she thought about Dalton more than she cared to admit. He appeared twice during the week, once to bring her a rocking chair he'd made for her quarters, and once to repair a loose board in the schoolhouse steps. Each time, he was quiet and courteous, never staying longer than necessary, but always leaving her with a sense of warmth that lasted long after he'd gone. On Saturday afternoon, Helena stood in front of her wardrobe and stared at her limited selection of dresses. She'd brought only practical clothing to Weaverville, nothing suitable for dancing. Finally, she chose her best day dress, a soft blue cotton with simple embroidery at the collar. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed and would have to do. She was pinning up her honey-colored hair when Dalton knocked at her door precisely at 6 o'clock. When she opened it, her breath caught. He'd trimmed his beard and pulled his hair back more neatly than usual. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the strength of his arms. He looked both civilized and untamed, like the mountains themselves dressed up for an evening in town. "You look beautiful, Miss Warren," he said softly. "Helena," she corrected before she could stop herself. "Please call me Helena." His smile was warm. "Only if you will call me Dalton." "I already do," she admitted. "In my head." They walked together through the gathering dusk. The barn dance was being held at the Hendersons' property on the edge of town, in a large barn that had been swept clean and decorated with lanterns. Music already spilled into the evening air, fiddles and guitars playing a lively reel. Helena's steps slowed as they approached. The noise and crowd suddenly seemed overwhelming. Dalton noticed immediately and adjusted his pace, moving closer to her side without actually touching her. "We can stay just a short while if you prefer," he murmured. "Or we can walk past and pretend we were never here at all. Whatever makes you comfortable." The fact that he was willing to miss the dance entirely for her sake gave Helena the courage to keep walking. "Let's go in. I want to try." Inside, the barn was bright with lamplight and crowded with Weaverville's residents. Children chased each other between the adults, women clustered in groups near the refreshment tables, and men gathered along the walls to talk about mining claims and timber prices. The noise level was substantial, with music and conversation blending into a constant roar. Helena felt her shoulders tightening, her breathing becoming shallow. Then Dalton's hand appeared at the small of her back, not grabbing or pushing, just resting there like an anchor. The pressure was light enough that she could step away if she wanted, but solid enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "There is a quieter spot near the back," Dalton said close to her ear, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shall we?" He guided her through the crowd with care, using his size to create a path while keeping her shielded from the worst of the crush. They found a relatively peaceful corner where the noise was somewhat muffled and the press of bodies less intense. Mrs. Patterson appeared with cups of punch. "Miss Warren, so glad you could come. And Dalton, we don't see you at these affairs often enough." "I had good reason to attend this time," Dalton said, glancing at Helena with obvious warmth. Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. "Well, I'm delighted. Helena, you've been doing wonderful work at the school. The parents can't stop talking about how much the children are learning." They chatted for a few minutes before Mrs. Patterson was pulled away by her husband. Helena sipped her punch and watched the dancers swirl across the floor. The music was cheerful, the atmosphere festive. Slowly, she felt her tension beginning to ease. "Would you like to dance?" Dalton asked. "We can stay at the edge of the floor where there is more space." Helena hesitated. She'd learned to dance years ago in Sacramento's refined parlors, but she hadn't danced since her father died. Still, the thought of being held in Dalton's careful hands was appealing. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." He led her onto the floor as a waltz began, positioning them at the outer edge as promised. His hand settled at her waist with the lightest possible touch, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. His other hand took hers with the same gentleness. They began to move, and Helena was surprised to discover that Dalton danced well. His movements were smooth and controlled despite his size, and he guided her through the steps with confident ease. "Where did a mountain man learn to waltz?" she asked, looking up at him. "My mother insisted," Dalton said with a slight smile. "She said that just because we lived in rough country did not mean we had to be rough people. She made sure both my sister and I knew our manners and our dances. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She passed when I was 19. Dalton's expression grew distant for a moment. "She would have liked you. She always said the strongest people were those who stayed gentle in a hard world." Helena's heart squeezed. "I'm trying to be strong. Some days are harder than others." "You are stronger than you know, Helena." The way he said her name, soft and reverent, made warmth bloom in her chest. "You left everything familiar to build a new life. You stand in front of 15 children every day and give them hope and knowledge. That takes courage." No one had ever called her courageous before. She'd been called stubborn, difficult, ungrateful, but never courageous. Tears pricked her eyes and she blinked them back as they continued to dance. The waltz ended and another began. They danced 3 more before Helena began to tire. Dalton noticed immediately and guided her back to their quiet corner, procuring a chair for her and another cup of punch. "Thank you," Helena said, "for bringing me tonight, for making it bearable. It is my pleasure." Dalton leaned against the wall beside her chair, a watchful presence. "I enjoy your company, Helena. I hope you do not mind me saying so." "I don't mind." She looked up at him, at this man who seemed to see straight through to her wounded soul and treat it with such care. "I enjoy your company too." They stayed another hour, talking quietly while the party continued around them. Dalton told her about his life in the mountains, how he trapped and hunted, sold furs and meat to the miners and the town. He'd built his cabin 7 years ago after his sister's death, seeking solitude and peace in the wilderness. "You ever get lonely?" Helena asked. "Sometimes," Dalton admitted. "But I prefer loneliness to the alternative I found in cities. Too much noise, too many people crowded together. It brings out the worst in some." Helena understood that all too well. The mountains must be peaceful. "They are. You would like it up there, I think. The quiet is profound, and the only voices raised are those of the birds and the wind." The image he painted was so appealing that Helena felt a pang of longing. "It sounds beautiful. Come see it someday," Dalton said impulsively. "When the weather is good, I could show you my favorite spots. There is a meadow about a mile from my cabin where the wildflowers grow so thick in summer that you cannot see the ground, and a waterfall that catches the light just so at dawn. I'd like that very much." They left the dance around 9 o'clock, walking back through the quiet streets under a sky full of stars. The noise of the party faded behind them, replaced by the peaceful sounds of night insects and distant owls. At her door, Dalton paused. "Thank you for trusting me tonight, Helena. I know it was not easy for you. Thank you for making it possible." She stood on her toes and, in a moment of bravery she didn't know she possessed, kissed his cheek. "Good night, Dalton." His hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, and his smile was tender. "Good night, Helena." "Sweet dreams." She watched from her window as he walked away, his tall form gradually disappearing into the darkness. Her heart felt fuller than it had in years, filled with something fragile and precious that she was almost afraid to name. The next week slipped by in a haze of teaching and anticipation. Dalton came to town more frequently than his supply needs required, always with some excuse to stop by the schoolhouse. He brought her a bouquet of late-season wildflowers, their colors bright against the autumn landscape. He fixed her door when it started to stick in its frame. He sat in the back of her classroom one afternoon and watched her teach, his expression full of quiet admiration. The whole town began to notice their growing attachment. Mrs. Patterson teased Helena gently about her mountain man. and several mothers made pointed comments about what a good husband Dalton would make. Helena blushed and deflected, but privately she was beginning to think the same thing. Dalton never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He held her hand when they walked, but didn't try to steal kisses. He spoke to her with unfailing gentleness, even when they disagreed about minor things. He seemed to understand instinctively what she needed, when to offer comfort and when to give space. In mid-October, he made good on his promise to show her the mountains. He arrived early on a Saturday morning with 2 horses, one a gentle mare he'd borrowed specifically for Helena. The day was clear and crisp, perfect for riding. Helena had never been much of a horsewoman, but Dalton was patient, showing her how to sit properly and handle the reins. They rode slowly out of town and into the forest, following trails that wound up into the hills. The world transformed around them. Massive pines towered overhead, their needles carpeting the ground and muffling the sound of the horses' hooves. Sunlight filtered through the branches in golden shafts. The air smelled of resin and earth, and the particular freshness that came from elevation. Dalton pointed out landmarks and wildlife tracks, explaining the patterns of the forest with the ease of someone who'd spent years learning its secrets. Helena felt herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, into the profound quiet that surrounded them. They stopped for lunch beside a creek that tumbled over smooth stones. Dalton had brought bread and cheese and apples, which they ate sitting on a fallen log while the horses grazed nearby. "It's so peaceful here," Helena said, watching the play of light on the water. "I can see why you love it." "It heals things," Dalton said quietly. "The wilderness. It has a way of putting your troubles into perspective, of reminding you that the world is bigger and older than any individual pain." Helena turned to look at him. "Did it heal you after your sister? Some. Enough." He met her gaze, his blue eyes serious. "I will always carry that guilt, that I did not see what was happening in time to stop it. But up here, I found a kind of peace with it. I learned that all I can do is try to do better, to be better, with the people who come into my life now." "You've been very good for me," Helena said softly. "You make me feel safe. I haven't felt that way in a very long time." Dalton reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You are safe with me, Helena. I promise you that. I would never raise my voice to you, never raise my hand to you. I would sooner cut off my own arm than cause you harm." The fierce sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. She believed him absolutely, this gentle giant of a man who spoke softly and moved carefully and treated her like something precious. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, the confession escaping before she could stop it. Dalton's expression softened into something so tender it made her heart ache. "I have been in love with you since the day you arrived on that stagecoach, looking so scared and so brave at the same time. I looked at you and thought, there is a woman who has survived storms. I wanted to be the one to help her find calm waters." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and kissed her with a gentleness that stole her breath. His lips were soft against hers, questioning rather than demanding. Helena leaned into the kiss, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you, Helena Warren," Dalton said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I know my own heart. I want to spend my life making you feel safe and cherished." "I love you too," Helena replied, feeling the truth of it singing through her veins. "I never thought I could feel this way about anyone. I was so afraid that my past had broken something in me that could never be fixed." "You are not broken," Dalton said firmly. "You are scarred, perhaps, but scars are proof of survival. They are proof of strength. You are the strongest woman I know." They sat together by the creek for a long time, hands clasped, talking about their dreams and fears and the future they might build together. Dalton spoke of his cabin, how he could expand it, add rooms, make it a proper home. Helena talked about her teaching, how she wanted to establish a small library for the children, maybe start an evening class for adults who wanted to learn to read. The sun was starting its descent when they finally remounted and headed back toward town. At the edge of Weaverville, Dalton pulled his horse to a stop and looked at Helena seriously. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours if you will have me. I know I am not a refined man. I live rough and I do not have much in the way of material wealth, but I can promise you honesty and kindness and a love that will never waver." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will court you. I don't care about refinement or wealth. You've given me something far more valuable. You've given me peace." His smile was radiant. They rode the rest of the way into town side by side, and Helena felt like she was floating. For the first time in her life, the future looked bright instead of frightening. The courtship that followed was the talk of Weaverville. Dalton made no secret of his devotion, and Helena stopped trying to hide her feelings. He attended church with her on Sundays, sitting in the back pew and standing for hymns with his deep voice adding to the music. He brought her small gifts, always thoughtful rather than extravagant. A book of poetry he'd ordered from San Francisco, a shawl in soft wool for the coming winter, a carved wooden box for her to keep her letters in. Helena's students adored him. Dalton started visiting the school regularly, telling the children stories about the mountains and the animals that lived there. He taught them to identify different types of trees by their needles and bark. He showed them how to read the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of birds. In November, the first snow fell on Weaverville. Helena woke to find the world transformed, everything blanketed in white. School was canceled for the day, and she was making tea in her quarters when Dalton appeared at her door, snow dusting his hair and shoulders. "Come with me," he said with boyish enthusiasm. "I want to show you something." She bundled into her warmest coat and followed him out into the winter wonderland. He led her to the edge of town where the forest began, to a grove of aspens whose bare branches were frosted with snow. In the center of the grove stood a young pine tree, perhaps 8 feet tall, its branches heavy with white. "I thought we could decorate it," Dalton said. "For Christmas, make it beautiful for the whole town to enjoy." Helena's heart melted. Together, they spent the morning hanging decorations Dalton had fashioned from scraps of fabric and carved wood. Red ribbons fluttered among the branches. Small wooden stars dangled from green twine. When they were finished, the tree looked magical against the snowy landscape. "It's perfect," Helena breathed. "The children will love it. I hope so." Dalton pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind so they both faced the tree. "I wanted to give you a good memory of winter, something warm to hold on to." Helena leaned back against his broad chest, feeling safe and cherished in his embrace. "Every moment with you is a good memory." They stood there until the cold forced them back toward town. In her quarters, Helena made hot tea while Dalton built up the fire in her stove. The small space felt cozy and intimate with both of them in it. "Helena," Dalton said as they sat at her little table with their tea, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About our future, about what comes next." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife. But I know that you have only been in Weaverville a few months, that I am asking you to make a big decision quickly. So I will wait as long as you need. I just want you to know that my intention is marriage if you will have me." Helena's pulse quickened. Marriage. The word had always terrified her before, had represented loss of freedom and safety. But with Dalton, it meant something entirely different. It meant partnership and protection, and a love that spoke in soft voices and gentle hands. "I will have you," she said. "I don't need more time to know that I want to spend my life with you. You've shown me who you are in 100 small kindnesses. I trust you, Dalton. I love you. Yes, I will marry you." His face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her deeply. Helena wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," Dalton said, "but I will get you one, the best I can find." "I don't need a ring," Helena said. "I just need you." "You will have both," Dalton promised. "You will have everything I can give you for the rest of our lives." They told Mrs. Patterson first, knowing that she would spread the news faster than any telegraph. The older woman's face creased with delight as she hugged them both. "I knew it," she crowed. "I told my husband the first week that you two were meant for each other. Oh, this is wonderful news. We will have to throw you a proper wedding." The town rallied around them with enthusiasm. The women organized a party to celebrate the engagement. The men teased Dalton good-naturedly about being tamed. The children in Helena's class made her congratulations cards, decorated with careful drawings of hearts and flowers. Dalton went to Sacramento in early December to order a ring and arrange for a minister to come to Weaverville to perform the ceremony. While he was gone, Helena felt his absence like a physical ache. She'd grown so accustomed to his steady presence, his quiet strength. The days without him dragged, but he returned on the fourth day, riding into town with snowflakes in his hair and a small velvet box in his pocket. He came straight to the schoolhouse, where Helena was just dismissing her students for the day. The children scattered with giggles and knowing looks, leaving them alone. Dalton got down on one knee right there in the schoolroom, among the desks and slate boards. "Helena Warren," he said, his voice soft but steady, "will you marry me and make me the happiest man in California?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small sapphire the color of mountain lakes. It was perfect, understated and beautiful. "Yes," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes." Dalton slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. She laughed through her tears, clinging to him, feeling joy so pure it was almost painful. They set the wedding date for the day after Christmas, giving them time to prepare and allowing families from the surrounding areas to attend, despite the winter weather. The minister Dalton had contacted agreed to make the journey to Weaverville for the ceremony. Helena wrote to her mother's sister in Sacramento, the only relative she still spoke to, inviting her to the wedding. Her aunt wrote back with warm congratulations and regrets that the weather would prevent her from traveling, but she sent a beautiful lace veil that had belonged to Helena's mother as a wedding gift. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Helena and Mrs. Patterson sewed her a dress from white muslin, simple but elegant. Dalton worked on his cabin, adding a bedroom and expanding the main living space. He built new furniture, a proper bed and wardrobe for Helena, shelves for the books she would bring. On Christmas Day, the town gathered for a community celebration at the church. Afterward, Dalton took Helena up to see the cabin for the first time. They rode through the snowy forest, the world quiet and pristine around them. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by massive pines, smoke curling from its stone chimney. It was larger than Helena had expected, built from logs chinked with mud and moss. The roof was sound, the windows fitted with real glass. Inside, Dalton had created a home. The main room held a large fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, and comfortable seating. Rugs covered the plank floors and curtains framed the windows. The new bedroom was off to the side, furnished with the pieces Dalton had built. Everything was clean and well made, ready for her to add her own touches. "What do you think?" Dalton asked nervously. "It's wonderful," Helena said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "It's perfect. I can't believe you did all this for me." "For us," Dalton corrected. "This is our home now if you are happy here." "I will be," Helena promised. "How could I not be happy anywhere with you?" They spent the afternoon arranging her belongings, the books and small treasures she'd brought from town. Dalton had already moved her cases up the day before. By the time they rode back to Weaverville that evening, the cabin felt like it was waiting, ready to embrace their new life together. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sun brilliant against fresh snow. Helena woke early in her little room behind the schoolhouse for the last time. Mrs. Patterson arrived to help her dress, fussing over every detail until Helena looked like a winter princess in her white dress and her mother's lace veil. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." Helena thought of her mother, who died when she was 12, who'd endured her father's rages with silent dignity until illness took her. She hoped her mother was watching somehow, glad that her daughter had found a different kind of man, a better kind of love. The ceremony was held in the church at 2 o'clock. The building was packed with townspeople, miners and their families, children dressed in their Sunday best. Evergreen boughs decorated the altar, filling the air with their fresh scent. Dalton stood at the front with the minister, and Helena's breath caught at the sight of him. He wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, his hair neatly tied back. He looked handsome and strong and nervous, his eyes locked on the door as he waited for her. Mr. Patterson walked Helena down the aisle since she had no father to do the honor. When Dalton saw her, his whole face transformed with joy and love. He reached for her hand when she arrived at his side, his fingers closing around hers with familiar gentleness. The minister began the ceremony, but Helena barely heard the words. She was too focused on Dalton, on the emotion shining in his blue eyes, on the slight tremble in his hands that told her he was as overwhelmed as she was. When it came time for the vows, Dalton spoke in that soft voice she loved, promising to love and cherish her, to protect and honor her for all the days of his life. Helena made the same promises, her voice steady despite her tears. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Dalton cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her tenderly, mindful of their audience. The church erupted in applause and cheers. Helena laughed against his lips, happier than she'd ever been in her life. The reception was held at the Patterson store, which had been cleared and decorated for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing. Helena and Dalton waltzed to the same tune they danced to at the barn dance, and it felt like coming full circle. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes and rode out of town together, heading for the cabin. Dalton had prepared everything, laying in supplies so they wouldn't need to come down for a week. This would be their honeymoon, 7 days of solitude in the mountains. The cabin was warm when they arrived, fire already burning in the hearth from Dalton's earlier preparations. Candles glowed on every surface, casting soft light. A meal was laid out on the table, simple but hearty. Dalton helped Helena out of her coat and veil, his movements slow and reverent. "Are you tired? We can eat or rest or whatever you need." Helena turned to face him, her heart full to bursting. "I'm not tired. I'm perfectly happy right here with you." They ate dinner together, talking and laughing. the easy companionship they'd developed over the past months deepening into something even more intimate. When the meal was finished, Dalton banked the fire while Helena changed into her nightgown in the bedroom, her hands trembling slightly with nervous anticipation. She knew what came next. She'd had the basic facts explained by Mrs. Patterson in awkward, clinical terms. But she wasn't afraid, not with Dalton. She trusted him completely to be gentle with her, to put her comfort before his own needs. When she emerged from the bedroom, Dalton was waiting, his own shirt unbuttoned to reveal the powerful muscles of his chest and shoulders. He looked at her with such love and desire that she felt warmth pool in her belly. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, closing the distance between them. "I am the luckiest man alive." He kissed her slowly, deeply, his hands moving over her with careful restraint. Helena melted into him, her own hands exploring the warm skin of his chest and back. He was all hard muscle and gentle strength, and she felt completely safe in his arms. Dalton led her to their bedroom, and they came together with tenderness and passion. Dalton always checking that she was comfortable, always moving at her pace. There was some pain, as she'd been warned, but it was brief and overwhelmed by the intimacy of being so close to him, of truly becoming one with the man she loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Helena's head on Dalton's chest, as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her back. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I did not hurt you. You could never hurt me," Helena said. "That was perfect. You are perfect." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, my love. We have all the time in the world." Helena closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, feeling safer and more content than she'd ever imagined possible. The week they spent in the cabin passed like a beautiful dream. They made love and talked for hours and explored the winter forest together. Dalton showed Helena how to snowshoe, how to identify animal tracks in the fresh powder. She showed him the book of poetry she'd brought, reading aloud while he whittled by the fire. They cooked meals together, learning the rhythm of sharing space and chores. They discovered each other's quirks and preferences, building the foundation of their life together. Dalton proved to be an excellent cook, much to Helena's relief, since her own skills were limited. She, in turn, organized the cabin with efficiency, creating systems that would make their daily life easier. On their last morning before returning to town, they woke to find it snowing again, heavy flakes falling in a hushed curtain. They stayed in bed longer than usual, wrapped in each other's warmth. "I do not want to go back," Helena confessed. "I want to stay here in our little world forever." "I know what you mean," Dalton said, "but we have responsibilities. Your students need you, and I have trapping lines to check. We can come back here every evening, though. This is our home now." Helena smiled. "Our home. I like the sound of that." They returned to Weaverville that afternoon, and life settled into a new pattern. Helena continued teaching, walking down to the schoolhouse each morning and returning to the cabin each evening. Dalton worked his trap lines and hunted, selling furs and meat to support them. The income from Helena's teaching position, though modest, helped them save for the future. In February, Helena realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable, though she waited several weeks to be sure before telling Dalton. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, then concern. "Are you happy about this?" he asked. "I want to make sure you are ready." "I'm happy," Helena assured him. "A little scared, but mostly happy. I want to have your children, Dalton. I want to build a family with you." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We are going to be parents," he murmured against her hair. "I am going to be a father. I promise you, Helena, I will be nothing like your father was. Our children will grow up knowing only love and kindness." "I know they will," Helena said. "You're going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Helena continued teaching until May, when her growing belly made it too difficult to stand for long periods. The school board arranged for a temporary replacement for the last month of the school year, with the understanding that Helena would return the following autumn if she wished. Dalton was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted she rest frequently, brought her anything she needed, and worried constantly about her health and comfort. Helena found his devotion both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to carry her up the porch steps. "I know," Dalton said, setting her down but keeping a supportive hand at her back. "But you are precious to me. I cannot help wanting to take care of you." Helena softened. "I know, and I love you for it. Just remember that I'm still capable of doing things for myself." In late June, when the wildflowers were blooming in the meadows Dalton had told her about, Helena went into labor. Dalton rode down to fetch Mrs. Patterson and the midwife while Helena tried not to panic. The pain was intense, coming in waves that left her breathless. Mrs. Patterson arrived and took charge with calm efficiency, getting Helena settled and comfortable. The midwife, a capable woman named Sarah, examined her and pronounced that everything was progressing normally. Dalton paced outside the bedroom, looking pale and terrified. Every time Helena cried out, he flinched. Mrs. Patterson finally took pity on him and led him into the room, where he immediately went to Helena's side. "I am here," he said softly, taking her hand. "I am right here with you." His presence helped. Helena gripped his hand through the contractions, drawing strength from his calm voice and steady presence. He spoke to her constantly, reminding her to breathe, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. After 8 hours of labor, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, healthy and perfect. The midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Helena's arms. Helena looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and beautiful, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Dalton leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face as he touched their son's tiny hand with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "You did so well, my love. You were so brave." "What should we name him?" Helena asked. They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, one name seemed to fit. "James," Dalton said. "After my father, James Brennan." "James," Helena repeated, smiling. "It's perfect." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a good baby, healthy and alert, but he still required constant attention. Helena and Dalton took turns with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, stumbling through the learning curve of caring for an infant. Dalton proved to be a natural father. He was gentle and patient with James, singing to him in his deep voice and carrying him around the cabin during fussy periods. Helena often woke in the night to find Dalton standing by the cradle, just watching their son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never knew I could love like this," he told Helena one evening. "I thought what I felt for you was the deepest love possible, but then James came along, and somehow my heart just got bigger." Helena understood exactly what he meant. Their family felt complete in a way that made her previous life in Sacramento seem like it had happened to someone else. In September, when James was 3 months old, Helena made the decision not to return to teaching right away. She wanted more time with their son, wanted to be fully present for these early months. The school board understood and hired a permanent replacement, though they made it clear that Helena would be welcome back whenever she was ready. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Helena cared for James and maintained their home while Dalton worked his trap lines. They spent evenings together as a family, Dalton teaching Helena more about the mountains and wilderness survival while James dozed in his cradle. The following spring, when James was nearly a year old and taking his first wobbly steps, Helena realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt less frightening and more like a natural extension of the family they were building. Their daughter, Rose, was born in January of 1881 during a snowstorm that blanketed the mountains in white. She was smaller than James had been, more delicate, with wispy blonde hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same blue as her father's. James, now a busy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing Helena diapers and trying to hold the baby under careful supervision. Dalton balanced both children with remarkable ease, often sitting by the fire with Rose in one arm while James climbed over him like he was a mountain to be conquered. "Our family is growing," Helena said one evening, watching Dalton with their children. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Dalton replied. "You have given me everything, Helena. A home, a purpose, these beautiful children. I wake up every morning grateful for my life." Helena felt the same gratitude. The scared woman who'd arrived in Weaverville nearly 3 years ago felt like a distant memory. She'd been transformed by love and safety, and the knowledge that she was valued for herself, not for how well she conformed to someone else's expectations. The years passed in a blur of small moments and large joys. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved exploring the forest with his father. Rose proved to have her mother's gentle nature and her father's quiet strength. In 1883, Helena gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Grace. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Dalton built on another wing, creating separate sleeping spaces for the children and a larger main room where they could all gather. Helena organized their home with efficiency, creating routines that kept the household running smoothly despite the chaos that 4 children could create. Money was sometimes tight, especially with so many mouths to feed, but they always had enough. Dalton's skills as a trapper and hunter kept them supplied with meat and furs to sell. Helena took in occasional sewing work from town to supplement their income. They grew vegetables in a garden plot Dalton had cleared, preserving the harvest to see them through the winters. Through it all, Dalton never raised his voice. Not when James broke a window playing ball. Not when Rose spilled an entire jar of preserves on the floor. Not when the twins stayed up crying all night with colic. He remained patient and gentle, handling discipline with quiet talks and logical consequences, rather than anger or violence. Helena watched him with their children and fell more deeply in love with him every day. He was showing their sons how to be strong without being cruel, showing their daughters that they deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. He was breaking the cycle of violence that had marked Helena's childhood, giving their children something better. In the summer of 1885, when James was 8 and Rose was 4 and the twins were 2, Helena's aunt from Sacramento came to visit. She'd written several times over the years, but had never made the journey until now. Helena was nervous about the visit, worried that her aunt would judge their simple life in the mountains. But Aunt Caroline arrived with warmth and enthusiasm, immediately charmed by the children and the beautiful setting of their home. She stayed for 2 weeks, and during that time, she and Helena had many long conversations. "I was worried about you when you left Sacramento," Aunt Caroline admitted one afternoon while they sat on the porch watching the children play. You seemed so fragile, so damaged by what your father had done. I was afraid you'd never recover." "I wasn't sure I would either," Helena said. "But then I met Dalton and everything changed. He showed me that not all men were like my father. He gave me space to heal and the security to trust again." Aunt Caroline studied Dalton, who was currently being used as a climbing apparatus by all 4 children at once. He bore it with good humor, making sure the smaller ones didn't get hurt while the older ones tested their agility. "He's a good man," Aunt Caroline said. "You chose well, Helena. These children are lucky to have both of you." Before she left, Aunt Caroline pulled Helena aside. "Your mother would be so proud of you. You've built a beautiful life here, filled with love and laughter. That's all she ever wanted for you." The words stayed with Helena long after her aunt returned to Sacramento. She thought about her mother often, wishing she could have met Dalton and the children, knowing she would have loved them all. The children continued to grow, each developing their own personalities and interests. James was adventurous and outdoorsy, happiest when he was exploring the forest with his father. Rose was bookish and creative, always drawing pictures or making up stories. Samuel was mechanically minded, taking apart anything he could get his hands on to see how it worked. Grace was the social butterfly, charming everyone she met with her bright smile and cheerful chatter. Helena loved them all fiercely, differently, completely. Being their mother was the greatest joy and privilege of her life. In 1888, when she was 32 years old, Helena became pregnant one last time. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her tired and sick for months. Dalton worried constantly, taking over more of the household chores and childcare to give her time to rest. Their youngest son, Thomas, was born in March of 1889. The birth was difficult, and afterward, the midwife told Helena that she likely wouldn't be able to have more children. Helena wasn't upset by the news. 5 children felt like exactly the right size for their family. Thomas proved to be a calm, happy baby, content to watch the world around him with wide eyes. The older children doted on him, fighting over who got to hold him or help feed him. Dalton carried him everywhere in a sling Helena had made, keeping him close while he worked around the property. 5 children, Dalton said one evening when Thomas was a few months old. They were sitting on the porch in the twilight, watching fireflies dance over the meadow. The older children were asleep inside, worn out from a day of playing. "Can you believe we've created 5 new lives? Sometimes it feels surreal," Helena admitted. "When I think back to who I was when I first came to Weaverville, I can barely recognize myself. That woman was so afraid, so broken. I never imagined I could be this happy." Dalton shifted Thomas to one arm so he could put the other around Helena, pulling her close. "You were never broken, my love, just wounded. There is a difference. Wounds can heal, especially with the right care." "You healed me," Helena said simply. "Your gentleness, your patience, the way you always made me feel safe. You gave me the space to become who I was meant to be." "We healed each other," Dalton corrected. "You gave me purpose and love and a reason to be better than I was. You gave me a family, Helena. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, their children slept safely, surrounded by love. The cabin they'd built together stood solid and warm. The forest whispered its evening song around them. Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Sacramento to Weaverville, from fear to love, from isolation to family. She thought about that first day when she'd flinched at angry voices, and Dalton had spoken so softly, making her feel safe for the first time in memory. She thought about all the moments since then, dancing at the barn dance, riding through the mountains, their wedding day, the births of their children. 1,000 small kindnesses and tender words, a lifetime of gentle hands and quiet voices. "I love you," she said to Dalton, "more than I can ever properly express." He kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. "I know, and I love you just as much. Forever, Helena. You and me and our beautiful family forever." Thomas stirred in his arms, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. Dalton stood carefully, and Helena followed him inside. They tucked their youngest son into his cradle, then checked on the other children, pulling blankets up and pressing kisses to foreheads. In their own bedroom, they lay down together, Helena fitting herself against Dalton's side as naturally as breathing. His arm came around her, holding her close. This, she thought, was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not a house, but a heart. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joys and challenges. The children grew and changed, learning and exploring and becoming their own people. James eventually became a forest ranger, dedicating his life to protecting the wilderness he loved. Rose became a teacher like her mother, bringing education and kindness to another generation of mountain children. Samuel opened a repair shop in Weaverville, his mechanical skills in high demand. Grace married a kind rancher and filled her home with love and laughter. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a trapper and guide, learning the mountains as intimately as Dalton knew them. Helena and Dalton watched their children build their own lives with pride and joy. They became grandparents many times over, their cabin often filled with the sounds of visiting grandchildren. As they aged, their love only deepened, weathering the storms of life with the same gentleness and patience that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party in Weaverville. The whole town turned out to celebrate the couple who'd become something of a legend. Helena and Dalton danced to the same waltz they'd shared at that first barn dance, older now but no less in love. 30 years, Helena marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, so scared and lost. And I saw you and knew my life was about to change, Dalton said. Best decision I ever made approaching you that day. Best decision I ever made was trusting you. They continued to dance, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors who'd watched their love story unfold over 3 decades. The music swelled, and Helena closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the memory of all the moments that had led them here. When they were very old, when their children were grown and scattered and their grandchildren were having children of their own, Helena and Dalton still lived in the cabin in the mountains. They moved slower now, their bodies marked by age and hard work, but their love remained constant. They spent their days quietly, sitting on the porch and watching the seasons change, telling stories to visiting grandchildren, tending a small garden. Dalton still spoke softly, still moved with care around Helena even though she no longer flinched at raised voices. Some habits were too ingrained to break, and besides, he'd never seen a reason to change what had always worked perfectly. Helena had long since overcome the fears that had once ruled her life. She'd grown strong and confident over the years, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued. But she never forgot where she'd come from, never took for granted the gift Dalton had given her with his gentleness. One evening in late summer, when the air was warm and the crickets were singing their twilight chorus, they sat together on the porch as they had thousands of times before. Dalton held Helena's hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "You have any regrets?" Helena asked. "About how we lived our life?" "Not a single one," Dalton said. "I would not change anything. Well, maybe I would have found you sooner so we'd have more years together." Helena smiled. "We've had plenty of years, Good years, full of love and family and purpose. I couldn't have asked for anything better. Neither could I. Dalton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You made me a better man, Helena. You gave my life meaning beyond just existing. I am grateful for every moment we've had together. As am I, Helena said. You saved me, Dalton. In every way a person can be saved. You showed me what real love looks like, what a good man looks like. You gave me the family I always wanted and the peace I never thought I'd find. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The forest around them hummed with life, familiar and comforting. Inside the cabin, lamps glowed warm against the gathering darkness. This was their legacy, Helena thought. Not just the children and grandchildren they'd created, though they were precious beyond measure, but the example they'd set, the proof that love could be gentle and strong at the same time, that safety and passion could coexist, that wounds could heal given patience and care. Dalton had never raised his voice to her, not once in all their years together. He'd spoken softly and made her feel safe always, just as he'd promised from the very beginning. And in doing so, he'd given her the greatest gift anyone could give, the freedom to become fully herself, without fear. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Helena leaned her head on Dalton's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and sure. They'd built a good life together, a beautiful life. They'd loved each other well and raised their children with kindness. They'd made a difference in their small corner of the world, and when their time came to an end, many years later, they went peacefully, knowing they'd lived fully and loved completely. Their children buried them side by side in the small cemetery outside Weaverville, under the shade of tall pines. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their long lives, but their real memorial was in the lives they'd touched, the love they'd shared, the family they'd created. It was in the gentle way their sons spoke to their own wives, in the strength their daughters showed in building their own lives, in the kindness their grandchildren extended to the world. The cabin in the mountains stood for many years after they were gone, eventually becoming home to one of their great-grandchildren who loved the forest as much as Dalton had. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted just right through the trees, visitors swore they could feel a presence there gentle and protective and full of love. It was the spirit of what Helena and Dalton had built together, a love that spoke softly but resonated through generations, proving that the gentlest voices can create the most lasting echoes, and that true strength lies not in domination but in tenderness, not in fear but in making others feel safe always. Their story became part of Weaverville's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The schoolteacher who arrived broken and afraid, and the mountain man who loved her with such careful devotion that he healed her wounded heart. The couple who built a family on a foundation of gentleness and respect, who showed that love didn't have to hurt, that safety and passion were not mutually exclusive. And in the retelling, their story gave hope to others who carried their own wounds, who flinched at raised voices and sudden movements. It reminded people that healing was possible, that love could be soft and still be strong, that gentleness was not weakness but the highest form of strength. The mountains stood eternal around Weaverville, keeping watch over the town and the stories it held. And among all those stories, none shone brighter than the love between Helena Warren and Dalton Brennan, the woman who learned to trust again and the man who spoke only softly and made her feel safe always. Their love endured beyond their lifetimes, woven into the fabric of the community they'd been part of, inspiring generations to come. It proved that even in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, where violence and hardship were common, gentleness could not only survive but thrive. That the strongest love was built not on domination or control, but on mutual respect, patience, and the unwavering commitment to protect each other's hearts. And so their story ended not with sorrow, but with peace, with the knowledge that they had lived well and loved completely, with the certainty that what they had built together would continue long after they were gone, rippling outward through time like stones thrown into still water, touching lives they would never know in ways they could never have imagined. It was a good ending to a beautiful story. A closed chapter filled with love and hope and the promise that, even in the hardest times, gentleness can transform everything. That speaking softly can be more powerful than any shout. That making someone feel safe is the greatest gift one person can give another. Helena and Dalton's legacy lived on in every act of kindness their descendants showed, in every gentle word spoken instead of a harsh one, in every moment of patience chosen over anger. They had changed their small corner of the world simply by loving each other well, and that was all they had ever wanted to do. Their story was complete, their love immortal, their impact immeasurable. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the pines around Weaverville, some said you could still hear Dalton's soft voice promising that everything would be all right, that Helena was safe, that love would always win. It was a promise he'd kept every day of his life, and a promise that echoed through the generations that followed, a reminder that the most powerful force in the world is not strength or wealth or power, but simple, enduring, gentle love that makes people feel safe always.